Hello again, and welcome back to the Docentric Getting Started series of video tutorials. In this tutorial, we're going to demonstrate the complete process of starting from scratch and creating a brand new Docentric template for one of the existing SSRS reports. And not just that we are going to create a template, we are also going to configure D365 to use that particular template instead of the standard SSRS design. We will demonstrate everything on the example of Certificate of Analysis report. So let's get started. What did I mean when I said that we are going to create a Docentric template from scratch? That means that we are going to start from a blank Word document, and then in the first phase we will deal only with its layout, with the template layout. So we will create, let's call it a mock-up of our final printout. It would be something that we would like to get as a result of printing the report. After that phase is finished, in the second phase we use Docentric tools from the Docentric designer to transform that mockup or a static document into a fully functional Docentric template. Before we can do that, before we create a mockup, we need to see how the current SSRS report looks when it is printed. So let's do that. Here we have quality orders, and for this quality order here, 87, we have prepared some tests, like these two tests, and for each of them we already registered some results. For this one, these two results, and this one has also its own results. There are also some notes on these two tests, and also some note on the quality order. Now, if we want to get the certificate of analysis, you will see that I have already several of them, so let's work on this last one. Let's print it and see, without Docentric, what kind of a result we get. I will only say that I want to print a Docentric screen because the printout will be nicer, but I will use the standard SSRS design. So this is the kind of a printout that we get, and we want now to create the Docentric template that will give us the same result, but will allow us to make the modifications later much easier than through SSRS. So what is the first step? We want first to get one Word document that will look like this. We can make it completely different, but the easiest thing is to repeat already existing design and then later maybe make the modifications that we need. Therefore, what would be my approach? I would start from a completely blank Word document. Here it is, and try to repeat everything that I have in this design. To make it easier, I will put them side by side. So let's analyze what we have on the left side. First, there's this section that will typically appear at the top of each page, which means that it needs to go into the header of Microsoft Word. So here I will go into the header, and what do I need? I need on the left side something and on the right side something. It is easiest to achieve that by adding one table that would have one cell for this and one cell for this. So I need two columns and just one row. It can be without any borders, and I need this content, so I can select this, copy and paste here. And on the right side we need all of this. It will be maybe the fastest if I go here and say that it is right aligned and type. Now obviously the fonts are completely different, so I would for example say that I want Calibri and maybe some size 8 or maybe something probably larger, while this one here is 14 bold. Let's leave it that way. What do we have here? First we have a header information, so something related to that certificate, to the quality order and so on. And after that we have the notes that are related to the quality order, to the header. Then for each test we have this section. So for this first test I got information about the test, then some notes that were on a test, and finally the results for that particular test, and that repeated for another test. So it's basically enough to have just this one section, because then it will be repeated for every test. So first, this part here, what does it have? It has several columns, 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. And how many rows? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it is the easiest to insert here the table with 4 columns and 8 rows, and to repeat this content. So I will say insert table with 4 columns and 8 rows. It doesn't need to have the borders. And here now we would repeat this content. So we would start typing certificate of analysis here and this value here. Account selection, name, contact, and so on, all of them in this first column. All of these mock-up values in the second column. Then this, again, captions in the third column, and the mock-up values in the last column. Now, I have already prepared the whole table on another page, so instead of having this here, I'm going to delete this table and copy it from another document. Here it is. Next thing, we would take this part here. What does it have? It can be just the free text, or it can be the table. It's easier if you have tables, it's easier to control the layout. So I'm going to add a table that will have 1 row for this, 1 for this, and 1 for this. And how many columns? 1, 2, 3. So we need 3 times 3 table with this content. Again, I will copy it from another document where I've already prepared it. Now we need this table here. What would you do? How many columns would it have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns, and I would add a lot of rows and then add more of them if needed, or remove unnecessary ones, and enter all this content as it appears here. But once again, I have prepared such an example, so I will copy and paste it from another document here. So that would be somehow our mock-up for the Certificate of Analysis Docentric template. And that would be the end of our phase 1, so starting from scratch, from a blank Word document, and creating the mock-up document, or in other words, something that we would like to get as a final printout when we are printing this Certificate of Analysis. For this we didn't need to use Docentric, we only needed to use Microsoft Word and what we know to do in Microsoft Word. Now when we have this, we can go into the next phase, and that is using the Docentric tools, these here, to transform this static or a mock-up document into a fully functional Docentric template. We see that everything here is disabled. Why is that? Because we need to bring the information about the report data source into this design. We will do it by clicking this icon here, the only one that is available, and pointing to one so-called DDSP file that stands short for Docentric Data Source Package. But obviously we first need to create such a DDSP file. How do we do that? When we want to generate the DDSP file for a certain report, we first must make sure to have that report registered with Docentric. What does that mean? Here in the Docentric setup, we need to register or configure all the reports that we want to execute through Docentric. Up to a certain point, up to a point when the report data source is ready, it will be plain SSRS execution, but when the report data source is ready, Docentric checks here among the reports that you have registered for Docentric if the report that's currently being executed is registered here. And if we don't find a matching report, we simply let SSRS go to the end. But if we find a matching report, we will take over the control and continue the execution through Docentric. So we first need to make sure that whichever report is executed when we run this also is found here. Here's the problem. For maybe 5 or 10 most commonly used reports like invoices and quotations and orders, you know the name of the report. But for a report like this one, Certificate of Analysis, you may not be aware of the name of it. And you would need to go to a developer who would need to check in Visual Studio which SSRS report is invoked when you click this. To help you with that, we implemented one handy little trick. If you go here into User Options, Account, you will find here that we added a few Docentric settings, and one of them is Discover Report Technical Name. If we set it to True and save and go back, let's see what's going to happen when I now print this report once again. You see here that the name of the report has been printed out. Well, this is the report that we need to register with Docentric, or precisely said, this is the report and this is the format. So I can copy this, go here and add that report to the setup by saying New and pasting this and selecting the only format that's available there, and it would be OK. So as we can see, these two fields have been set based on the selected report and the format. It's invalid. Why? It's invalid because it's missing the template. We cannot execute the whole thing through Docentric while it's missing template, but for now, let's not take care about it. At least we got one step further. We got the report registered with Docentric. That means that Docentric will take over when the report data source is ready. And one thing that we wanted to do, we will go here into Settings, Generation Options, and we will say that we want to generate that data source file when the report runs. So I will set this to True. I can add additional preview languages. I will add, for example, French, German, Italian, maybe we will need them later, and I will save this. So now, based on this setup, when I go here and print the report once again, let's see what's going to happen. We got the report as expected once again, but in parallel it was also downloaded to our download folder. Here it is. Let's see it. This is the file that has just been generated. It is basically one XML file that contains everything that our designer needs for work. We have that DDSP file and we will be able to import it into our Word document. So let's do that. Let's say use as template and point to this last generated DDSP file. I can make this larger, and here we got now the report data source schema presented as one XML structure. What we can see is that it doesn't have really the beautiful structure. Everything is on the flat. And what I mean when I say that everything is on the flat, that all these different types of records, the record for the header, records for the notes, record for the test specification, for the notes on test specification, for test results, and finally the notes on the test results, all of them are stored as this one same type of the record. And we can see that when we click this little icon here, View Sample Data, we see a bunch of the same records, Invent Test Cert of Analysis TMP, and somewhere here is the information hidden for these different types of the records. And based on these flags here, we should figure out which particular information the current record carries. SSRS reports have to live with that, with this type of a structure, but with Docentric we know better. We have a way of nicely reshaping this data source in the code and providing a nicer reshaped data source which will be more logical and will be simpler for the usage here in the template designer, because the main users of our designer are not technical people, it is the functional people and the key users in business. So I have prepared one data source file that was generated by executing such code, so executing the standard report plus the add-on of our logic for reshaping the data source. And I will now import that kind of a data source. I can do it by clicking this other button here, and I will point to this reshaped data source. Let's see that one. First, certificate of analysis can be printed for several certificates, not just one. That's why we have a top-level structure that is grouping all the data belonging to one certificate of analysis. Then for each certificate, we will have the data that belongs to the header, it's this here, and somewhere below that we will see as a substructure notes, a list of notes that can appear on that header. Here they are, and here are their fields. And then these fields were taken from that original TMP table and added here just the fields that should appear in the header. What's next? Next is a group or list of different tests. For each of them we will get this table printed, and we will have some data that are related to the particular test, or so to say test specification. Then comes a group of records that will be printed here. Those would be notes on the test, and they have again these three fields that we want to see here. Then we will have a list of test results. They will be printed here, and they have the fields that should appear here. And finally, at the bottom we might also have notes on the test results. They are also here. This kind of a data structure will help us to get quickly and conveniently the functional template. So let's start with that. One thing that is very convenient when designing the template is to switch on this live preview. It is constantly rendering our design based on our data and presenting the result. Right now everything here is static, there is no dynamic content in our design, which we can see by the empty element tree. That's why everything that we see in the preview is exactly the same as it appears in the design. But when we start using these tagging elements and bringing them here to the design, we will see a difference in the preview. Let's make this a little smaller just to get some space for the preview. Okay, another thing that is very useful is to check the sample data that we have so that we know what kind of a result we expect. Here we see a list of data for each certificate. Right now obviously we got this data source by only printing one certificate of analysis. Then for that one we have one header, which is as expected, with one note, and then we have two tests, this one and this one. This test has one result and another result, and it has one note, and this test also has one result, second result, and one note. So we expect at the end of the day to get 2 times this table here with some note and with some data from this header. For the beginning I will just add here some extra space. First of all that we see here we want to repeat for every certificate of analysis. Right now we have sample data just for one, but in theory there may be more than one. So first thing I will do, I will select all of this, and I will actually before that add one page break because I will want each certificate of analysis to start on the new page. Then I will select from the beginning up to that page break, which I can recognize by switching on paragraph marks, so up to page break, and I will put them within one Docentric repeater, which we call a list tagging element. And we need to say based on which collection of data all of this should be repeated. It will be based on this COA, or Certificate of Analysis, so I will do that. And because we know in this sample data we have just one of them, that's why I got this only once. I will turn this off so that it doesn't bother us, and let's continue. What we see here, all of this data should come from the header, from these fields here. So we would say, for example, instead of this fixed value, we want a field tagging element that is bound to. Now in the header, we need to go into this Indent Certificate of Analysis ID. In the similar way, you would get this one from the account relation, this one from the cast went name, and so on. Right now I'm not going to do it all, we will later see the final template so that we don't waste time on all of it. Here we see the elements that we have entered so far. If you need to print out the reports only in English, then you would leave these captions as they appear here, but if you need to work on multilingual reports, then instead of the captions you would use label tagging element, and with SSRS you need to know the label code, but here we can help you. It's enough to point to a label that is related to a certain field. In this case I will point to a label related to this field. And I got the translation here and also here, and I got the translation in the selected preview language. Remember, when I was generating this data source file, I selected also Italian, French and German, so if I select German, I will see the label translation in it. I will stop with this and I will move to the next part. Here we would want only to list these notes based on these records here. So we would again say list tagging element bound to the header notes, and now we would say give me the type ID, the description, and instead of this, the data that comes with the notes. So it's now, as you can see here in the note, this content here is printed here in the preview, and obviously in runtime it will come from the actual notes. One more thing, we don't want to print all of this if there are no notes. So how do we do that? We will select, for example, this and say give me one if tagging element if number of these header notes, so we can type here count of header notes, or we can do this so that we can focus on this expression. If the number of header notes is above 0, then show this section. We do have something in the sample data, so we will see this. Next, we want this whole table here repeated, so we are done with the header, and now we want this whole section repeated with every test. So we will select the table and we will again use the list tagging element and say bind it to this collection of test data. And remember, we have 2 tests, that's why we got now 2 times this table. Now in each test we have these fields that we want to present here. So let's start from the beginning. Instead of this check dirt, we will use the field tagging element and bind it from the current test to its test ID. And here we got the value for the first test and for the second test. They are the values that we have in the sample data here. And this one came here. In the similar way, we would replace this value and these values with, for example, here min max would be lower limit, upper limit. Let's do that quickly. Lower limit, and it should obviously be presented without decimal places, so I will use the formatting N0. And instead of this, upper limit again in N0 format. And in a similar way, we would replace also all these fields, all these values with the fields from here. Let's move on. These 3 lines here, again, the nodes similar to this one, but only these nodes are now nodes on the test. So we will use the list tagging element to repeat these nodes and to present the data on them. Here we see the different values coming from the different tests. And similar as we did here, we would want to show only if there are some nodes. So again, if tagging element, if the number of test nodes, so again count, above 0. Okay, so we have the nodes, and that's why we got the results here. And finally, here we don't need 2 table rows, and we need just one as an example, as a template, a material for a template. And now this one should be repeated with every test result. Again, list tagging element bound to test results, and these values should now be test quantity in N2 format, test result, but it would be nicer if this one was right aligned, and this one as well. And test result would probably be this test result value real, but if we are not sure, we can check quickly the sample data. So in the test results, these values here, test result value real is the one we need. So instead of all of this, this one was with 4 decimal places, so N4. So this would be the final template prepared for this report. As you can see here, we have all the labels used instead of these fixed captions, and we see them here, A for label and this block ABC for field tagging element. So here at the top we have all the fields and all the labels. Then, as we did earlier, these nodes, and conditionally shown only if there are some nodes to be presented. Then here is the list of all tests. As we can see, we reverse engineered the logic from SSRS, where some fields are conditionally shown or hidden, and we repeated that logic. Here are the nodes on the test specification, so to say, again presented only if there are some nodes to be presented. Then the results, as we can see, and finally the nodes on the results if they exist. Here we see that we get several pages of results. That's because this particular data source in this template was the one generated based on 3 different certificates of analysis, 1, 2, 3, and that's why we got 1, the second, and the third one completely different numbers. Not really difficult process, a lot of adding fields and labels maybe, some lists and repeating the fields, but we always benefit from having this live preview and having the possibility to tweak the sample data and to test in different languages. Here we see immediately the translations in French and Italian and any other language that we might have selected. This will boost your productivity fivefold, tenfold compared to SSRS, because you play with your data and with different conditions and with different layouts and immediately see the results. You don't need to save the SSRS report, build, deploy, and then find some document that you want to print and print it, but you see immediately your results here. So with this we finished creating our template for Docentric, and the only missing step is to apply this template in D365. So let's do that. Let's go to Docentric Report Setup, find our report, Invent Test Sort of Analysis Report. Remember, we stopped here when we didn't have any template. Now it's the time to add some template definition, one or more of them, and to attach this file that we previously worked on as a template for this particular report. So I will say add, I will leave this as it is, save, go back. So now I have my template ID and I only want my template to appear here. I will do that by saying template file attach, and I can have different storage types, but this is going to work out of the box if I take the file and upload it to Azure to this blob container, which I can also modify on the fly. So I will say, for example, training or getting started. So upload a new file. I need to point to my template. Successfully uploaded. If I go into the list of my certificate of analysis, I'll select the certificate I want to print. Previously we were printing through SSRS design, but now we want to use through Docentric design. Okay, and we should now get the results through Docentric completely. This blue title reminds us that that is true. We can also multi-select, for example, this one and this one and this one, and print this, and this one, which didn't have any tests. That would be our result. If we want to further modify our templates, it is very simple. Let's say that I want to change the color of this template. I would simply open it, go here, select this field, and do what you can do in Word. Change the color, save, and upload a new version. Now next printing should give us the green title. Here and here and so on. As you can see, the process is very simple and we got everything in half an hour. We started from a blank Word document and created a mock-up out of it by copying the design of the already printed report. Then we used the Docentric tools to transform the mock-up values, the fixed values, into a dynamic content coming from the report data source, and we applied the design in the Docentric setup. That's all that is needed. That was the fastest possible presentation of the main feature of the Docentric full version, and that is our template designer. But there is much more to Docentric. There are so many improvements to the standard D365 FO functionality that it really pays off to at least try out the product.